Hello guys, David Vose here. Beautiful day today. Got some clouds going over already. I think we're going to have some rain. Rained a little bit last night. Hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful evening. And I want to get right in it because I've noticed that if I am too boring in the first 5 minutes and I talk about the flowers, then a lot of you click off. So I want to get right into this because this is important and I think you'll find this interesting. By the way, guys, for those of you who watch these videos, always remember if I'm just boring at the beginning, you can just skip over a little of that at the beginning too. Most of the time, I will get into some very interesting things as we go on into the video. But I want to show you Matthew chapter 24 and verse 7. And this is something we talk about all the time. This is the famous story where Jesus is telling them what's going to be like in the latter days. And I find it interesting. I don't think we think about things. It's like we hear stories and we hear what Jesus said and we're told what Jesus said by the pastors, and then we read what Jesus said, but we don't hear what Jesus said. We only hear, for two different reasons. But even if it were translated correctly, we're hearing what the pastor says it means. And the pastor is learning from a book because his United Nations charter tells him that this is the way they're going to all interpret it, because they're all working for the Bavarian Illuminati. But the other thing is the interpretation now, or I should say the translation of the words. I will tell you something else. I've told you a lot of things about translation. I do this every day for many, many years, so I have an opinion about this. I have found, before I go on, I would probably say that I study this on a daily basis for many hours, more than most of the scholars you've heard of, the famous ones that think they know anything. Even Thayers and Genesius and Strong and all of them, I don't believe they had the information available to them that I have. And so there are people today that know more than these ancient scholars that we read as authorities. New light has come into the world. And so they translate these words. And sometimes I think these people believe that because the Greek is very descriptive, it has to do with astrology. So when you're in our world, our thought construct is you sin, you're bad, you're a bad person, and you've strayed away from this law, and therefore you're evil and you're a bad person and you're going to be destroyed. And we got all this government, and everything has to do with government, but that's not what the Greek language was. It was a story about you and I on a road, on a path. This is why the early church was called the way or the path. And the path was going around a mountain. And the mountain was your home. And at the top of the mountain, there was a grand citadel, which is, we're going to talk about here in a minute. It's a basilia, which is what was at the top of Atlantis, according to Plato, which is the kingdom. We call it a kingdom today. It has to have a king. Royalty, although the word is feminine and means more of a queen. Isn't that interesting? But basilia is like the ruling power over everything. But it has come down to mean more than that. And people believe in their heart and mind that because they find somebody in ancient classical Greek that may have used it slightly different, they have justified to think that's what it means all the time. And it can be used that way, and the sentence seemed like it makes sense, but it's not the actual original meaning. So if I were to insert the word sin every time the actual Greek says you make a mistake, it may sound like it goes right along with what you're reading. You think that's what it says. But insert fall down off the path, because you know that you're on a path. And you know where that path is leading, and the path is leading around the garden, and there's these 12 houses of creation. And we go up the mountain to the top during the light and during the summer when the crops are growing, we have the wedding, we do all these wonderful things that life is about, the main things that life is about. Courting, marriage, childbearing, hunting, and survival, building homes and citadels and kingdoms. And this is what the symbols are in astrology. So all these ancient words, like where it says you missed the mark in Greek, and it's translated sin, but it's missing the mark, which is if you've got a bow and you're shooting an arrow, you're trying to hit the bullseye, which is Taurus. So you're trying to practice and become good at survival during the day as you're climbing in information and graduating through the plan that we have here. And if you don't get your meal, you don't have the Holy Communion and eat the artos, which is what they translate bread, but the root word is Artemis, which is the huntress. And then there's also the hunter, Orion. And Orion's got his bow and he's trying to hit the bull's eye in Taurus. And so this is what all these words have meaning. And I don't want to get off too much into that. And now the darn winds come up, and I think it's going to affect the way this is blowing in here. But there are other many words that they believe they know the meaning of it, but then they say, oh, but there's all these other various meanings. What you need to do is go back to the original meaning or the root and realize that it isn't the way the word has been used by people, but it's the way that the word really means. And now you get a clearer picture. So notice in Matthew 24 and verse 7, it says, we'll rise up for nation against nation. And we've always seen this, that nation will rise against nation. And this conjures up in our mind war. Great war. In fact, not just skirmishes or civil war, but like maybe world war, nations against nations. Well, this is just stuff that we've conjured up in our mind. The Greek word there, 1453, means to awaken, to arouse. So it has to do with somebody who's sleeping and not rises up as much as awakens out of his sleep. And so it says that, and then the word nation, if you'll notice, it's ethnos. And anyone who knows English knows that an ethnic group is not a nation, but a race. And of course, if you look up the word 1484, the first definition is race. So we're talking about race consciousness and awakening. And that may be the more accurate translation than war. But here's the thing. It still may be correct. Because when races awaken, what do? Do they just get smarter? Or do they become aware that they're being screwed? They're awakening to what? Right? It's like they were in a dream, they were stupid, they were letting people rule over them, and now they've awakened to the truth. And they're mad. And so the next line there is basilia, epi, basilian. Epi means upon, upon. And so it can be translated many ways, like on or something like that, or even against. And they say, they of course, they put against, because they want you to think that it's kingdom against kingdom. But it's really upon. Another word that is also used to translate that word is over. You are up on. There's two words, up on, and it's like saying going over, certainly not under. You're up, over, not under. So they wouldn't translate that word under, they might translate it over. But it also might mean doing it into one nation and then another and then another and then another, nation upon nation upon nation, but not necessarily against nation, but upon. But if the reason that these kingdoms are upon kingdoms is because they're awakening, and it's not kingdoms, but it's races, then we're probably talking about the one particular race that rules the world, that has the royal power, the basilia, because as we said, basilia means kingdom, but the root of it is royal, a feminine royalness, authority over others. Well, if the races begin to awaken and say, wait a minute, who gave you authority or a kingdom over us? And therefore, these kingdoms may rise up literally upon each other. Because notice what it says next. And there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. Well, if we're trying to describe the end of this age, and we're saying, well, there's going to be all these wars. Okay, well, they better be big wars, because we've had a lot of big wars, or else they're not. How is this going to alert us to the fact that we're now in the end times? I mean, in other words, why is he talking about this, kingdom against kingdom? So we're going to have a war that ends the world? That's what he's saying? But wait, okay, then why is he throwing in earthquakes? Why would simultaneously we all of a sudden have earthquakes if we're having war? Unless the word seismo just means a shaking, and it has nothing to do with the earth shaking necessarily. But maybe more applicable would be the word agitation. So who's being agitated? The earth? We didn't say the earth is being agitated, although it may very well be, as we've said. This is why they think they're right, because it could be, that's what it means. It could be an agitation of the earth, probably because today the word shaking has come down to us as seismic activity, which is just a phrase that they've given to earth shakings. But the original Greek word had nothing to do with earth shakings. It had to do with shakings, period. And we're not talking about the earth, except for that we've got this word various places. So it's places that are shaking. All right, but what kind of places? Is it earthly places or realms? Spiritual realm? What is shaking here? Well, the word is topos. Have you ever seen a topographical map? Why is it topographical? Because it's the top? Not really, although it may be related. But it's the borders and the the limits of areas. This could be a mountain, this could be a river, this could be an ocean. There's these lines and borders are going to be mixed up. Races are going to be awakening upon basilia or kingdoms, and there's going to be a shaking in the areas that are considered some place, not necessarily a kingdom, but identifiable places on the map. It's not necessarily talking about maps, because we're just using the word for maps and saying there's these different places and borders and limits and roads and rivers and oceans, and these are the various places on the map. But if we're not talking about a map, it doesn't mention a map. It doesn't mention the earth. It's talking about a shaking, an agitation, about races, and an awakening, an agitation of the mind. And the various places in the mind are conclusions and beliefs, and perhaps beliefs that were unfair and wrong because they were like mountains that were impregnable, that Jesus said if you had faith you could move a mountain. We could literally not only understand this entire passage spiritually, this is what we've been told, that we're just taking it spiritually, or you could take it literally. Well, in a sense, the language, the human language is built that way. but only because we're not understanding that we put these meanings to physical things, and we only think about physical things, and we don't realize that these physical things are such because they are spiritual things. Mountains are massive barriers. They're not mountains. It's not a nickname for that thing over there. That's a mountain, that's a tree. No. That's not a mountain. That's an upheaval. That's a unsurmountable wall that I've got to deal with that rises above the rest of the valley, which is not a valley like we've just named it that, but we're describing it. We're saying the low area. So we never change our mind about it meaning the low area. We never change our mind about that being the high, insurmountable place where the trees grow around the mountain, an environment, an ecology, and on the mountain are certain mountain animals and mountain lions and bears. It's got an entire ecology. We don't think of this mountain as a mountain, and we don't imagine that the animals and the birds are on the mountain too. It's an entire environment. So I don't know if modern man has not deceived himself into thinking that the Bible is some kind of a parable when it talks about a beautiful garden and trees of life. Oh, that's got to be a parable. Unicorns. What if there were unicorns? It doesn't say there is a paradise now. We're going to restore it. But there once was a place, and there was a holy mountain. And in that particular mountain, things lived longer. And the birds landed in the branches of the trees. And therefore the tree was some kind of shelter for the animals and a refuge for birds, and underneath its boughs for the animals. Why do we have to make these animals some kind of spiritual demons or something? Or some representation of angels or something? As I've said, angels are just humans that have been exalted, but they are also ministers that watch over us, right? And so they're watching over us by being in a higher state of consciousness. And higher means the clouds. Now, if you lived in a world where you didn't believe that we were on a ball spinning through space, and you just saw the earth was your home, where you walked, where you lived, where you built your cabin, and you understood the low area to be where the river would come and the water, maybe you could go fishing down there, but the mountain would be the area where you would have safety from the flooding. Maybe a little higher up on the plateau, you'd build an area and you'd raise some chickens. But you would want to be living by a river or a creek. And so if you were describing this beautiful paradise with mountains and trees that were literal, and then you said, but there came a big earthquake and it all fell down. Well, what if it's saying there became an agitation of mind? There became fear. And some particular basilia, a kingdom, which was no part of this natural basilia, no part of the kingdom. As Jesus said, this kingdom is no part of my world. But some other kingdom arose, which is not a kingdom. You're taking it too literally. It's an environment. And based on thoughts, because if your thoughts are lies, you live in a world that's in a delusion. If your thoughts are correct, you're living in reality. So what if they were living in the kingdom of the reality and they were imagining a beautiful kingdom, and it was the shaking of the mind that began to shatter the images? Now that's a spiritual understanding, which would lead then to a physical occurrence. Because if your mind began to get shattered and you didn't know what was up or down anymore, perhaps you, being the creator of this perfect paradise around you, are now feeling as though you're not worthy. And so you're literally banished from that paradise. It's in your mind. And the earth itself then begins to degrade. Now, that's all I'm going to say about that. I mean, we could go deep into that and realize that our language is spiritual by its own definition, and that it has physical and literal consequences. Now, the reason I bring this up is because if we were to understand this as an earthquake, why would Jesus say the end of the world would be marked by kingdom against kingdom, or races against races? We could still be talking about war. Kingdom against kingdoms. But also, there would be famines. Why would there be famines? Well, maybe because of the war, right? But, and by the way, that word for famine is hunger. Another word that can be understood in a spiritual sense. When you're having a famine, it's because you're hungry. There isn't enough to satisfy you. You can have a spiritual hunger or a physical hunger. So if we say we're starving, we could use the word that we're physically impaired because we don't have any food, and we don't have enough protein, and our bodies are shrinking, and we're losing weight, and we end up passing out and dying. If you take it that way. But you could be saying he's hungry, meaning he has this desire. He's destitute. He can't find his meat, his bread, maybe spiritual bread, maybe happiness. But it's not necessarily a famine, but a hunger. The hunger might not be due to a famine. It might be due to the war. It might be due to sadness, breakup of families, being destitute as a people because of the war. There could be a lot of things that means. But when you add this word earthquake, it makes no sense. Unless that the nations that are rising up against nations are happening because the earth is shaking. That perhaps the fact that the earth is shaking simultaneously when all the wars are going on and all the upheaval is because once the ground started shaking, we started getting scared, and we started searching and finding out information, and then building, information, and getting really smart and finding out information we didn't know. And this led to an awakening. All right. But that would mean the earthquake comes first. Or we got so awakened that it caused a spiritual earthquake in society. And that this earthquake is not an earthquake, but just a quake, just a shaking in various places, meaning the borders and lines and things that separate one thing from another in our minds. What I'm going to do today is put that idea on the back burner. And we're going to discuss the possibility that they're right, and Jesus is talking about war and famine, real famine, and not just hunger, and real earthquakes and not just shaking of the mind, or a bringing down of society because we've awakened. So let's put that on the back burner as one possibility, and let's go through the concept that maybe the earth does have earthquakes, and maybe there are times where there are great cataclysms. And this is why Jesus is talking about earthquakes, is because it's not necessarily a time of awakening, but a time of cataclysm, that there's a cycle involved. When will you return? Well, there's a cycle involved. A cataclysm is a Greek word, and it means kata, down. Kliza is a cycle, a down cycle, or the down cycle of the ages is what that word meant in the ancient Greek. It meant that you're going around and through the ages, and you're now reaching a down cycle. Whether it be spiritually down, ignorance, depression. It could be literally just going around the wheel and going down. But you see, that's only symbolic. But we say that sun's going down. Well, is it really going down or is it going around? Well, it's going down because there's going to be darkness. So we're going to have this cataclysm, means the overthrow, the throwing down, shall we say, of the arrangement, the order that we have. And this again might just be a physical cataclysm where the earth is broken up and destroyed, and real earthquakes and asteroids or something. As I sit here today, I think, well, if there's going to be an asteroid hit the earth, I suppose it could just be out of nowhere. Tomorrow we could be sitting here, I'm told that Rome was destroyed around 500 AD because the fact that there were some volcanoes that went off. And it caused a lot of ash to be in the air, and this caused a cooling effect, and the crops began to fail, and there was famines, and the Roman Empire began to get weak. I don't know how much I ascribe to that, because I think that it may have had a hand in making the Dark Ages, certainly. But I feel that Rome fell 100 years, maybe 200 years before that, between 300 and 400 AD. And the Holy Roman Empire, of course, was established around 800 AD. So there was a period between the fall of Rome and the rise of the Holy Roman Empire, which does coincide with a lot of volcanic activity. But for me, it just seems like it's a point that I want to ponder for a moment, because you don't normally think about things like this. But is it logical that Jesus would say the end of the world is going to be marked by earthquakes, as well as great famines and pestilence and war? Now, those three things make sense. If you got war, you're going to have famine. You're going to have pestilence because you got war, right? And that might even be due to an awakening of the races. But to throw in the earthquakes, if it's real earthquakes, seismic activity, doesn't seem logical to me. So then my mind thinks, well, okay, it's not an earthquake, it's just a shaking, an agitation of society. And so the awakening makes sense. And now we're not even talking about war, we're just talking about awakening and agitation of the mind, and the fall of society, not a fall of the physical earth, not a fall of some cataclysm like it says in Revelation, I saw a mountain that fell into the sea, and a third of the sea died. Well, logically, we would say, okay, now that's pretty descriptive. That sounds like a shaking. And it's telling you what's causing the shaking. There's a mountain that falls into the sea. Well, he might be talking metaphorically of a big asteroid. I don't know of any mountain that ever fell into the sea. They're already on the ground. How do they fall? You say, well, it could be a volcano. Yeah, but they're still not falling. It doesn't seem like a likely way to describe a mountain going off in a volcanic activity, saying it fell into the sea, unless you're talking about, okay, some of the mountain in lava went into the sea, but that didn't fall into the sea, it just kind of rolled in there. So what does it mean a mountain fell into the sea? And then a verse before that, it's talking about a star that fell from heaven. Well, we know that's probably illogical, unless we're talking about it's not really a star. Maybe they didn't know this difference between stars and meteorites. Maybe it's a big asteroid that looked like a star when it was coming out of the sky, and boom, it hit the earth. It just looked like a star, but it's not actually a star. There's a lot of things like this. We've got to ask ourselves the question. If the Bible's telling the truth, and it says that there's going to be a star fall from heaven, and at the same time, quinkadinkly, a big mountain falls into the sea. Could it be the same event? And could that also be the same event of the shaking? Because if you'll read on in Matthew and Luke about these days and this time that Jesus is speaking of, he says men's hearts will fail them. Interesting phraseology. Their hearts shall fail them. We don't know if it's talking about spiritual hearts, emotions, or physically your heart pumping. See how this works? We never know. We never know if it's literal or spiritual, because every one of these physical words describes a physical activity on a physical plane, and that's all it ever was. It was very simple, which caused the emotions. So if we're afraid, it's because of something physical that's happening. Nowadays, we are afraid for things that aren't really physical. You might be playing a game or watching a movie and be afraid. You have no reason to be afraid, but it's just simulation. So we rack it up to emotions, not real. But I just find it odd. And then you continue on and it says, men's heart failing them for fear for the things coming upon the inhabited earth. What's coming upon the inhabited earth? Like what? Because what? Because society is about to fall, because all of a sudden we've awoken and blah, 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 now we're just going to destroy ourselves? Is this what it's talking about? Well, it looks like it. If you look around the world, we're having this great awakening right now. And society's falling because we're mad at the races that are ruling over us. So that's a very logical explanation. And then we're going to have to, if that's true, we'll have to scratch that word earthquake and just put the word shaking or agitation. And we're going to have to assume that the places, the topos, that's going to be shaken or agitated is the lines and borders and limits that we've all believed were true, but now it turns out were false because we're awakening. But I said we were going to put that on the back burner and go with the literal. So if it's a literal earthquake, it seems a little odd that it would just happen right at the same time that we're having a war and a famine and a pestilence. And yeah, we get the famine and we get the pestilence to come after the war. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be earthquakes, unless, of course, we're talking about missiles or bombs that cause earthquakes, or governments that are causing them, because this is how they're trying to control us. Hey, Jesus is just telling us what's going to happen. He's not trying to, explain all the nuances and the reasons why the earth is shaking. He didn't say it was because of, the earth warming up because it's going through the galactic plane and we're going to flip on its axis. He didn't say anything like that. He didn't describe it that way. Maybe that's what what's going to happen, and what's going to be the result is the earth's going to quake. Maybe we're going to flip on the axis. But that's pretty strange. Maybe there's some vibration that causes some schizophrenia in the minds of men. And as we get closer to these ages where the earth is going to go through this area in the galaxy where there's turbulence and perhaps magnetism that pulls the earth off of its axis, and this causes the earthquakes and maybe the agitation of the mind because we're going through, we don't know, any of this is possible. But what's most logical? If we're talking about earthquakes to be a sign, not just in various places, right, but a shaking or an agitation of all the places, not knowing where they go anymore, a mixing up of every place, and evidently of every race. Well, let's talk about the idea that you've probably thought most of your life that this is talking about the end of the world. In fact, Peter talks about the earth burning up. Could we go spiritual on that? A spiritual fire? Sure. In fact, it's very logical to think that the burning of the earth is going to be trouble and a burning of the emotions and not actually a physical burning. The elements being intensely hot. We could go through that verse and go through the words. But just on the face of it, the elements, what is that? The elements, what is that? L? The elementary chart? Rudimentary things, they call it sometimes. Principles? The atomic structure? Are we talking about elements or elementary things? And there are biblical translations today that translated elemental spirits, which is what it originally had meant, because back in the day, they didn't know anything about atoms and elements. They didn't talk about those things. What they talked about was spirits that were entities that ruled. Planets were entities. Stars were deities. And there were little spirits that were in nature that held things together because of their laws. And so they called them elemental spirits. Now, as time went on, scientists depersonalized these names, but kept the names. We still call the planets, or like they're entities or deities, Uranus and Jupiter, and well, Jupiter is Zeus, right? And now we understand them as divorced from the original meaning. You've got to admit that. Originally, they didn't think of them as planets. They thought of them as intelligences, powers, authorities that could rule over you. Even beings, spirits. Maybe they didn't have bodies like you and I, but they were intelligent spirit beings. And there were little elemental spirits too. And so the elements being intensely hot could be the elemental spirits. Being heated, I don't mean literally hot. It could mean like an argument. We haven't looked up the words. I'm not going to go into all the words and give you all the possibilities of the words in that verse. But imagine where we could go with that. Perhaps there's going to be a war not only on the races on the planet, but maybe there are spirits inside the earth that are warring too. Because doesn't it say in the book of Revelation that there will be a war in heaven? And Michael and his angels will battle with the dragon and his angels? And they shall be thrown out, and they'll come to the earth knowing they have but a short time. Come down for wrath upon the earth to deceive the entire inhabited world. So we see that there's a lot of cosmology going on here, and we don't know what that word means. It doesn't mean cosmos. That's just the thing that we have taken the word and we've applied it to this thing and this concept that it's the whole cosmos, which we've gotten everybody to think is a bunch of stars that have planets and rotations and other galaxies, and this is the cosmos. You could be a cosmonaut, or you could be an astronaut, because it means the same thing, the astro or the cosmo. But the word actually means like cosmetics, the outer order or the arrangement of all things. The order, the outer order, meaning the arrangement, not the being, not the spirit, but the clothes or the jewels or the way that it is arranged itself in attire, almost like the attire. And it's considered a woman because a woman was always beautiful and she had beautiful raiment and braided hair and beads and jewels, and she was beautiful. She was the arrangement, the outer beauty. But we don't know that. We don't understand that. So when we see Cosmo, we think of what we're being told today. Spoon-fed this NASA crap. That's all lies. I was telling somebody, I think yesterday, that everything that we think is a science today, a lot of it's just a philosophy. They have models, theories, but it's not actual proof. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying that anything can be proved, but there are some things that we have satisfied ourselves, that this is so. But there's a lot of stuff that we're being told that we think is so that many of their scientists don't even know it's not actually so. Because it's so deep, the information is so vast, they can't comprehend it all, so they just accept it. That's an established fact. But one of the ways they determine something, here comes the wind, philosophically, and then tell us is real, is like this. Look at Jupiter. Now, they say it's made of gases. There's all these swirls, and if you were living on Jupiter, you couldn't breathe because it's not air, but they have their own atmosphere, and it's all these gases. And they say it's ammonia and helium and hydrogen and little droplets of water and ice. Well, my first question is, how do you know it's made out of ammonia? Oh, they claim they took a tin can and got some gasoline, poured it in there and lit it, and it shot off and went up there, and they took some amazing pictures, We ain't got the tin can back, but they sent it by way of radio signal, and they did some tests. And sure enough, there was ammonia and droplets of ice. They could figure that out, right? Maybe the camera caught the little pieces of ice or the little water droplets, or well, somehow or another they've theorized or philosophized this, and they're going to tell you that's the way it is. And based on their philosophy of what it might be composed of, they did it in a test tube on Earth and got the colors that way. And they've done that in a test tube, and they put it together, and it says it kind of makes these yellow, green, and red stripes and swirls when you boil it and mix it together and shake it up. Maybe these particular things mix. At first, they might mix in this weird boiling way with all these swirls, and they say, well, that's what it looks like. So when we tell people what Jupiter looks like, we're going to say that's what it looks like. And we're going to say it's got red, green, and orange stripes. Maybe a big eye on one side. We'll just paint that. Just painted. We've never seen it. But here's the thing. We never stop to think about it. If it's gases wouldn't stay in the same shape. You wouldn't have that eye or those rings always in that for thousands of years. You wouldn't have these rings just like that or these swirls just like that. If it's gas, it's going to be mixing and swirling, and just like our Earth, if you were to look down, you'd see the clouds moving. It'd be all white, and it would move out of the way, and you'd see the sea or some land. So it'd be changing. You wouldn't just see this exact same artwork. But they tell us that we're seeing a picture of Jupiter all in color, which we can't see because it's whether it's gas or whether it's water or whether it's sand, like they tell us the moon is. It's still reflecting light, and light is going to be reflected back as white, as the color of the sunlight. There's not going to be any color. We see the sky as blue, not because the sky is actually blue, but because of the angle of the light going through it. And so at the horizon, you see red or yellow or orange or purple, because depending on the angle of the sun, it's going to refract and make different colors. So if you get away from the Earth and look back, it's not going to be blue. They're lying to you. It is a lie. It's all CGI. And so this is how they come up with their lie. They have some idea and they philosophize. So they're not telling you a lie. Those colors are what it would be if you could be on the surface, perhaps. If you could use your own eyes, maybe it would look like that. But not from here. Now, most scientists don't know that. They think it actually looks like that. But it's a lie based on some philosophy. They think that the galaxy, they invented the idea and the shape of the galaxy based on mythologies. You know, like the Fool or whatever in the center with all these four rivers and stuff. It's just people making art. And it's literally become science today. You see, I've been aware for a long, long time, but, you know, it's becoming more and more in my focus. You know, I'm beginning to pay a lot more attention to this, but we really don't know if we're living in a galaxy because we can't get outside of the galaxy and take a picture to see what it looks like. And as I've said many times, you're in a forest. Let's say you're in thousands of acres of forest, and you're a human being standing in the forest, and you're told, now I want to know how many trees. I want to know what kind of trees, so big trees, little trees, you know, how far are they dispersed from each other? How many of them are there, and how far does it go? And is there other forests outside of this one? Well, if you're a human and you're inside the forest, unless you've got some technology that mankind's never known before in the mount, you know, some kind of, you could leave your body and get down and look and get up there and look. If that's what the astronauts at NASA are doing, is they're leaving their body and they're looking and they go, oh, I see, it's a galaxy. It's got four spokes and there's other galaxies and these stars and that's a nova and this, you know, we know the colors and everything. Well, then they're not talking about anything rational, because maybe you and I don't even believe that they're leaving their body. Maybe we'll say, oh, they're just dreaming. They're making it up. Well, that's kind of what they're doing. But they don't know what the galaxy looks like. It's impossible. And what, you know, if you look back, we find that in ancient times they had a philosophy. It was philosophy. It wasn't science. Science came along relatively late. The ancient ones talked about the universe as a philosophy. They didn't look at a telescope to get the ideas and measurements. They were describing principles. That's why the word cosmo doesn't mean the structure of the universe as we've been told, but it means a philosophy. And they weren't talking about the physical structure. And of course, if we're right about that, then the physical structure, as we've been saying, literally is the spiritual structure, the mental structure, the mind. The agitation of mind would lead to the destruction of the physical universe because it is only the images of our thoughts. And if we start dreaming up monsters from this darkness, this unknown, and we start being afraid, then we create the darkness. We don't create the darkness. The darkness is the unknown. But if we're afraid of the unknown, simply because we don't know, and we're not at peace with what we are, if we don't have faith in the fact that we are, we think we have this false conclusion that maybe we could die, then we could be afraid of something we don't know, because maybe that's what's coming around the corner, death. But let's just say for a moment then that Jesus was talking about great big earthquakes, because we didn't go a little bit further on there where I was quoting from Matthew and Luke, where he says that there will be fear, men's hearts failing them for fear for the things coming upon the inhabited world. But then it continues, the waves of the sea shall be foaming and raging out their shame. Why would waves of the sea have shame? Why would they be foaming out shame, guilt, fear? There's no, if the waves of the sea is just a physical thing, as we understand it, it's not emotions, it's not fear, it's not thoughts, it's not an agitation of mind, it's an agitation of the physical earth. And there you go. He said the waves are going to be doing something boisterous. But he adds a weird word, just like he did with the earthquakes and with the races and the awakenings and all these words like hunger, not famine. But now we have this word, the waves raging. That's a spiritual idea of anger and shame. But yet that word wave or the sea is very literal. So it's our rage and this shame that's causing the ocean to rage. So now again, will there be raging typhoons and hurricanes in the latter days, according to Jesus? Or is he talking about the hurricanes of minds and nations, the mental activity, the disruption of society? Is he talking about literal earthquakes and literal tsunamis? If you had earthquakes big enough, you would have a lot of tsunamis in various topographical places on a map. But if you're going to be talking about that, when somebody just asks you the question, what's going to be the end of the world? And you mention earthquakes and waves of the sea, and connect that with the shame that the world's experiencing, then you know that it's got to be at least connected to our state of being and our state of mind. But the actual physical result is that there will be great big earthquakes. Well, one last point here before we move on about another part of this is it just to remind you my reluctance here to understand this immediately, because I just find it odd if we're talking about physical earthquakes and physical tsunamis and hurricanes that would happen at the very moment that there would be upheavals in society and wars unless it was man that was causing the war and the earthquakes with missiles. We've talked about that. HARP or whatever else they might be doing. But my mind sort of resists that because I'm thinking in cycles that this has all been planned. And I know it has because we got these Kali Yugas and these cycles that we've talked about, the ages of the Yugas and the day unto the Lord like 1,000 years and all of this that we've talked about. And I think it's an appointed time for all of this. Of course, if we know when a asteroid's going to come around, we can calculate exactly when it's going to hit the Earth from thousands of years. Because we know astronomy, which was their ancient way. They had Stonehenge. They were observing the heavens. They could see when lights would come through, and every year would get closer and closer. And they'd say, we calculate in so many years it's going to hit the Earth. They did stuff like that. Somebody prepared Noah to build an ark. And did you know, by the way, that recently there's a book that's been dug up, or some ancient works, which were the plans of Noah's Ark in detail. It gives you all this. Some guy, some Finkel or some scholar, or maybe one of the scribes, maybe from Levi, but he happens to be a person just like they always are. Like Sitchin was a Bavarian, and the Lankowski, because they always have the Auskis and the Steinge, which, by the way, I've said Palestine means the palace of Satan. That's what the word st on the end was, set, or Satan. And so it seems odd that the most powerful person in the world, most of them, whether it be science, we got an Einstein, whether it's sex, we've got an Epstein or a Weinstein, or the man who's running BlackRock, who's a Fink or something. Well, these words are very clear. But there's a guy who claims, and this could be all made up, just like Sitchin. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but I'll have to look into it a little bit more. But he claims that he's got this information, which is all the plans for building the ark. Well, he says it's a sphere. Perhaps it was a half sphere. I saw a picture of it as like a bowl, but it was round on all sides, like a dome, upside down. And that would be his ark. Well, I got to looking at that, and I remember that, and I've done videos on this, that even in our Bible in chapter 8 and 9 of Genesis, 7, 8, 9, stuff in there where the flood's happening, if you look at the measurements, it really is talking about pi. And pi has to do with the radius of a circle. So it's interesting because all of the traditions and the stories and mythologies seem to indicate that Atlantis wasn't another age as much as it was another world. Like as if he traveled somewhere in some kind of a boat, or remember the word body and boat, same word, like a temple, and he put bitumen around the boat so that it wouldn't leak, so it would be anointed to get through the trouble. And all the animals were put into the boat. So it seems like it's the earth itself, because you couldn't put all the animals in the universe on anything but a body, the boat, which is the earth, or abode. And it was the abode that we are in now. It's where all the animals are here. And this got us through some other cosmic time that was like the end of another age or time, where we literally got in it was something happened that was going to be turbulent with water, that we couldn't breathe, we couldn't live in that environment, we would drown. So we had to get into a boat, which is maybe the earth, which is why we come down here and it had bodies. We were escaping some other tragedy that is some more of this esoteric stuff that we're talking about here. But I digress. So if the earthquake happens, and it's a literal earthquake, there's no doubt that Jesus is talking about upheaval in a sense that is global, catastrophic. I remember as a Jehovah's Witness, they would always tell us, well, we're in the last days because there's lots of earthquakes going on. I don't believe that's what Jesus meant. There's always been lots of earthquakes, and there may be more earthquakes now than there was 1,000 years ago, but there might have been way more earthquakes 12,000 years ago. Because indeed there was. The earth, geologically, we can prove that the earth has gone through periods of time where there's way more earthquakes than we're having now. Obviously, what Jesus is talking about is not an earthquake, but the earth quaking, the shaking of it. And this is why when they went up on Pentecost into the upper room, and it says that the room or the house was shaken while they were in the upper room. And then we also see Peter and the book of Hebrews talking about the world shaking. The book of Hebrews talking about the earth shaking, the mountain, that Mount Zion was shaken. And we're waiting for a shaking that's going to level everything. And it's not talking about just a couple earthquakes in various places. A little bit more than normal. Maybe a couple of cities get destroyed. We're talking about earthquakes that could disrupt the entire civilization. Now, after having said that, do we have any evidence that that actually occurred? Well, you've probably heard about the fact that people believe that the dinosaurs were all destroyed by an asteroid. This is what science has believed now for some years. A lot of people just say, yeah, I've kind of heard that, but we're not even sure if we're remembering whether that was the official story or whether there's some other thing that happened, but we've heard of that, most of this. We know that the dinosaurs disappeared, according to them. Although, as I've said, I don't believe there was any dinosaurs. I believe we still have mammoths. We call them elephants. I think we still have long-necked creatures. We call them giraffes. I think we have rhinos, and we have a lot of things. But it could be that there was a time in the past where these animals were bigger. And there could have been various species or varieties of these animals, different kinds. I mean, even today we have different kinds of elephants and horses. Different, mules and Appaloosas or what. I don't know if that's just a color or what. But there's different kinds of horses and there's different kinds of deer. We got elk and caribou and different things like this. And one part, maybe all the caribou would disappear, but we still have all the elk. Okay. With the buffalo, we know what happened to them. We went over there and murdered them all. But according to science, in America, there were 4 different kinds of elephants. They call them mammoths, woolly mammoths. And they all were grazing and living here, something like millions and millions of them. And they all disappeared about 12,800 years ago. Which just happens to be when the Great Pyramid said that Atlantis happened, and so these are the ages of time since the flood occurred. Hey guys, I've been rambling on for another hour, and I can't load both hours, so I'm going to stop it here. We're going to make part 2. I think you'll enjoy the second part, okay? But I'm going to load this today and the second part tomorrow. You'll have to wait till tomorrow to hear the rest of it. But anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. I really do. I'm going to leave to the Grand Canyon tomorrow to see my daughter. We're going to meet there and go on some hikes and stuff. So I'll take some film of that for you. I'm so excited. I haven't seen my daughter in a few months. And I miss her a lot. So I'm going to have a really good day tomorrow and the next day. And so may the Lord bless you guys, and He will, and we'll see you on the flip side. Have a good one.